Today is April 23rd, 2026. And before we get into the geopolitical news related to the Middle East, I wanted to touch on an article that I came across from antiwar.com about automatic draft registration. We're talking about the military draft here. It's by an Edward Hasbrook, and he writes that on March 30th, the Select Services System sent the White House its proposed regulations for automatic draft registration. The Select Services System is an independent federal agency that exists to plan, prepare, and train staff, military reservists, and volunteers to operate and administer a military draft when Congress and the President decide to order it, including maintaining databases of names and addresses of draft-age men to be used to send out induction notices should a draft come into place. The SSS is a small agency given unprecedented authority to demand access to data from all other federal agencies. The attempt to register potential draftees automatically will be a large, complex exercise in data collection, sharing, matching between the SSS and different federal agencies. And this agency may actually have the resources that it needs to do this kind of thing because of how integrated Palantir's systems have become within and across federal agencies. And we've talked about Palantir and its implications within this administration over the course of several other videos. So this is the first visible step in transitioning from people voluntarily signing up to be drafted should a military conflict come up, and being automatically drafted with data that's been aggregated by federal agencies. So this long process began with the enactment of the SSS proposal for automatic registration, draft registration in December of 2025. The new scheme is supposed to go into operation in December 2026. Now, this initiative actually has its roots in the Biden administration. Documents released show that the Biden administration started it was proposed under the Biden administration by former Trump 2016 Oregon State Campaign Director Jacob Daniels. Still today, Daniels is one of Trump's loyalists who got jobs at the SSS during Trump's first administration. Most of the latest news articles have said that all male U.S. citizens and residents will be registered automatically by the SSS, but they're leaving out the fact that the SSS is going to have this behemoth job in locating and identifying potential draftees. In addition to the practical problems of determining who is subject to the draft and their current posting mailing address, the switch to a new registration system requires jumping through many regulatory loopholes. And these are loopholes these are going to be loopholes that differ throughout each federal agency when information by the SSS is requested for potential draftees. So even before the start of automatic registration, the SSS gave DOJ access to registration databases in 2025, and in late 2025 proposed sharing its registration data with other agencies, and that was for immigration enforcement purposes. Now, I think that a lot of the regulatory hoops that the SSS is going to have to go through to obtain the data that they need to put this initiative into place, I think that many of the regulatory red tape will likely be blown through by that agency, especially if the president himself and members within his cabinet are behind this initiative. And so I wanted to cover that because I do find it interesting that something like this has flown under the radar and not many people are talking about it. And you couple this with the idea that the Army has basically raised the age at which you can apply for service from, I believe it was 35 to 40 recently. And also we've seen over the course of 2025 and 2026, this increase in recruitment across all of the military branches. It's at 15-year highs. And so what are we getting ready for? What's the trend that we're seeing pointing towards in the future as it relates to military conflict and engagement with other countries? much of this information, I would argue, has flown under the radar, and this SSS agency has kept a lid on it because of the current conflicts that we're engaged in right now. Obviously, that's a very controversial initiative to be proposing when we're in the middle of this war with Iran. And this dovetails with another story that I wanted to cover. So you have this automatic draft registration initiative that's being pursued. We're seeing private equity and the Pentagon work together to expand military infrastructure and improve supply chains throughout the U.S. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Steven Feinberg, the Pentagon's #2 and former private equity boss, faces a big sell for his career. He is trying to persuade Congress to allocate the $1.5 trillion, in which we've discussed in previous videos, for the military budget, for the 2027 military budget. Now, he's from Cerebras Capital Management, and that's an investment firm. And again, this is a proposal. This $1.5 trillion is a proposal for fiscal year 27. It's the largest year-over-year increase in the defense spending since World War II. Now, the Pentagon has created a list of categories that's called a presidential list, and includes priorities like the Golden Dome that Trump wants to build, this missile defense system that he wants to build, drone dominance and improvement in artificial intelligence and data infrastructure, and the defense industrial base. Now, of course, this surge in spending would pour into the military and help rectify the years of problems of cost overruns and delays of military hardware. Now, Feinberg has also clinched deals for the government to take equity stakes in at least 5 private sector companies, and is seeking tens of billions of dollars this year for taxpayer investments. The bets could take years to yield results and are complicated by a war with Iran that already has drawn down U.S. arsenals. And we see that this initiative, coupled with a similar one taking place in Europe. Europe is also, in a way, or in a sense, militarizing more rapidly than we've seen in a long time. Not only have they decided to dedicate 5% of their GDP throughout their countries to military spending, you're also getting outside help from private firms like JP Morgan Chase. And this is from the Financial Times. JP Morgan Chase will extend its commitment to invest in critical industries to companies in Europe and the UK. 6 months after Jamie Dimon, the chief executive, launched the initiative, the Security and Resilience Initiative, to bolster US national security. And this is a 10-year plan to funnel $1.5 trillion in funds to sectors deemed essential to national security, including defense, energy, infrastructure, pharmaceuticals, quantum computing, and AI. And this dovetails perfectly with what we talked about in a previous video about how the Pentagon is looking to use private firms like the Ford Motor Company to see how they can help integrate producing military hardware into their factories and that kind of thing. Now, what Dimon said at the launch of this Security and Resilience Initiative in October is that the world needed a very strong America. Chuka Umunna, the former UK politician who is leading the initiative in the UK for the bank, told the Financial Times that the strength of our franchise is built on the alliances the US has with the UK and Europe, which is absolutely vital for the US's position in the world. So it's almost like you have firms that are looking to pick up the slack from the US federal government, right? For Europe. The federal government says, well, look, Europe needs to take control of their national security infrastructure. They need to build it up. If they feel these threats from Russia, they need to build up their infrastructure on their own. They need to put more money into it, less money into the welfare states that many of them run, and be productive that way. So the federal government, in a way, steps out of the way, but private businesses, like, for example, JP Morgan Chase, they say, well, we have interests over there and we should help them build up. We don't have to rely on the taxpayer dollars to do it. We can help them build up their national security infrastructure as well. And so Chuka Umunna further says it is based on the acknowledgement that the US and its allies in the West have become too reliant and unpredictable resources for key industries and those relating to national security. So the reliance for national security needs, but also when it comes to the unpredictability of supply chains, for example. These are all reasons why you have JP Morgan investing in this infrastructure and seeing if the bank can help find bank, and not only just the bank, but also the other firms that are invested in this initiative can help keep Europe and their national security apparatus above water. Under the initiative, JP Morgan has said it will help companies raise up to 1.5 trillion. And this is following the war in this initiative is taking place following the war in Iran that's taken off, and also in a large part it's due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, obviously. Umna said that the US government has been clear that Europe needs to spend more money on its own security and resiliency without expecting the US taxpayers to underwrite this. Now we're seeing this, if we zoom in, on a smaller scale taking place in Germany, where Germany is looking to retool its commercial manufacturing industry to accommodate the needs of to accommodate the national security needs of Germany and NATO itself. This is again from the Journal. After decades as Europe's manufacturing engine, the country is mired in its longest stretch of stagnation since World War II, and it wrestles with competition from China and a slump in demand. Now, as American security guarantees look less certain and Europe is racing to arm, Berlin is positioning itself as the backbone of the continent's defense industry. The car industry is going through a crunch because of global downturn, geopolitical risks, and rising competition from China. At the same time, recent regulatory changes in Germany and the European Union have improved capital market access for defense companies, while huge government contracts and public financing schemes have unlocked nearly 1 trillion euros in defense funding. Across Germany's industry belt, factory lines that once powered the country's export miracle are being rewired into the machinery of Europe's rearmament. The government is on board. Idle factory floors and a growing pool of laid-off skilled workers are being redirected into the only sector still expanding at scale. That'd be the car industry, basically. And so you're seeing a lot of military activity taking place not only in Europe, not only in the U.S., but in Europe. You're looking at the U.S. looking to be more self-sufficient in military production. Germany looking for the same. Private firms looking to empower Europe and Germany in their effort to rearm. And why are we doing all of this stuff? Why are we seeing this rapid increase in military activity and spending across Europe and the US? Well, it's an interesting question, and I think that any answer you might give to that is an ominous one. We know that Europe is doing it because of the threat that they feel in their minds that's coming from Russia, and the idea that many of the countries closest to Russia believe that the Russians aren't going to stop with Ukraine. I've seen no indication of that, but that's what their thinking is. And of course, when we take a look at the US and why we're doing it, we're seeing shortfalls that's affecting leverage that we might have in these countries at stopping these wars in manufacturing capacity. If you look at Patriot missiles and Tomahawks and all of these things that have been spent furiously over the past month in Iran, you look at the issues in providing arms to Ukraine under the Biden administration and how we weren't able to get certain missile interceptors and missile systems to Ukraine quick enough for them to use against the Russians. This is why all this retooling is happening. And it could be potentially that a foreshadowing for a larger conflict that could happen in the future, especially when you look at this automatic draft registration, the volume of people that are going into the military right now, a lot of ominous signs. Now we're going to run in through these latest updates with Iran. As many of you heard from the last episode, there was the conflicting messages that we got from the administration last Friday about the Strait of Hormuz being open. It wasn't open. In fact, the IRGC, two gunboats from the IRGC struck cargo ships on Saturday. A cargo ship from Iran was boarded and seized on Sunday by the U.S., and that was followed by a slew of threats from Trump, threatening once more their infrastructure, like their bridges and energy power stations. And then, of course, on Tuesday the 22nd, the White House told Fox that the president had decided to extend the ceasefire. He had already extended it to Wednesday because the initial end was on Tuesday. He extended it to Wednesday, and then he further extended it 3 to 5 days. And as of yesterday, he extended the ceasefire indefinitely. So, of course, that contradicts his own statements that he's made earlier this week that he didn't want to extend the ceasefire at all. And this, of course, feeds into the very rational narrative and true narrative that Trump is becoming more erratic in the strategy that many people wish was there. The strategy that people are looking for just really doesn't exist. And he's looking for a way out by any means necessary so that this doesn't look like more of a loss for the U.S. than it already does, and it doesn't, and that hostilities don't start again. Now, Trump put on Truth Social that he said, quote, based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, they were asked to put the attack on the country on hold by representatives of Pakistan, allegedly. He said that the ceasefire will last until such a time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded on one way or the other. And of course, there's been back and forth between the two sides since the extension of the ceasefire took place. The U.S. it's been reported by Axios that the U.S. was actually waiting for Iran to come to the negotiating table because they presented sort of a broad list of demands to Iran to respond to, but they never really responded to those demands. And so Trump indefinitely extended this ceasefire, and that's according to U.S. sources that were speaking to Axios. And there's a growing assumption within the administration that they might be dealing with the IRGC instead of the civilian government in Iran. Now, as of today, the talks have stalled, and despite some optimistic headlines, as the two sides are still pretty far away on the nuclear issue and on the Strait issue, which is actually one of the main causes for why Iran actually just won't sit at the table right now. Now, this is perhaps why Trump agreed that the U.S. does not need a deal. This is more posturing on his side to get what it wants from Iran. And he actually shared a Washington Post article wherein the author argues that Iran is running out of oil. There's oil storage, money, and time now. There may be some truth to that, but there are many conflicting there are many conflicting positions right now on exactly what's happening when it comes to Iran and their oil and where they actually stand. Now, that post that Trump was citing from that article that Trump was citing from the Washington Post was written by an actual Bush era speechwriter. He was a speechwriter for Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Bush. And he was on Mark Levin's show, which Donald Trump has always asked us to pay attention to lately, advocating for boots on the ground. So despite a ceasefire technically being on, President Trump ordered the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any Iranian boat which poses a threat to the Strait of Hormuz, especially ones putting mines in the waters of the Strait. And I don't know how it's possible because Trump said that he destroyed all the ships that were laying mines and they're laying at the bottom of the sea. So U.S. forces conducted a maritime interdiction just off the Indian Ocean. This happened, it was yesterday. And so they're still indicting ships, but I believe that they're doing it very selectively. There was an article that came out from the Financial Times yesterday that was saying that dozens of ships that are tied to Iran have actually made it through the Straits. And this is no surprise because the U.S. at this time, I don't believe have the hardware, the military hardware that they need to actually secure an actual blockade that would be effective. They aren't even able to pull too close to the Strait of Hormuz because they would be in the striking range of of Iran's ballistic missiles and drones and that kind of thing. So, according to going back to the amount of ships that have actually traversed the strait, according to a tracking group called Vortex, at least 34 tankers with links to Iran have bypassed the strait. The Financial Times article we went over earlier said that there were dozens that went through. And it doesn't mean that there aren't, again, seizures happening. It's just that many ships are going through. So you really can't call it a blockade that's effective anyways. The IRGC also said on Wednesday they attacked a third vessel, and it was a container ship called the Francesca, owned by Mediterranean Shipping. And there was a Greek-owned ship also attacked by Iran, and it was the Euphoria. So all this to say, in this brief update on Iran, that we've gotten nowhere when it comes down to setting a negotiating date. There's still discussions that are likely happening behind the scenes to see if both sides can be brought to the table. But the biggest news I think we can say is that the ceasefire was extended indefinitely. Trump doesn't want a resumption in hostilities. Iran doesn't seem to want to either, but they're ready if hostilities do resume. I'm sure that many of their positions have hardened since then. And the interdiction of shipping has continued on both sides. Both sides continue to attack freighters that are trying to traverse the Strait of Hormuz. And so that'll cover our updates for today. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.